I see a lot of videos online about optimizing characters and character builds, but I don't see that many talking about tactics within the game. I decided to start this series to discuss tactical elements and tactical approaches that are universal in role-playing games and can help even the most under-optimized characters in any given RPG. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your Innkeeper, and today we'll be talking about tactics for initiative order. In my experience, players of role-playing games in general have one rule for initiative. Everyone wants to go first. The fighters want to run in and pound the bad guy into mush before it can act. The wizard wants to lay down a control spell. The cleric or bard wants to buff everyone before they act, and so on and so forth. But the truth is, initiative order for the first round of combat matters tremendously depending on your role within the group. I'm speaking generally here, and of course, there are going to be combats where an exception to this is absolutely necessary, but overall, I think this is a good practice. I'm going to lay down the initiative order based on your party role, what I think would be the most ideal for tactical advantage. The controllers within the party should always try to go first. These characters sometimes can end a fight before it begins, and going first means that the rest of the party can conserve resources if they do manage to end the fight before it begins. But even if they don't end the fight, they can drop down their control spell, and then the rest of the group can have important information on what to focus on. So any given combat, you're going to have more information after seeing which creatures the controller has affected with their spell. For example, the controller casts a spell that restrains a group of enemies. The hard-hitting boss is caught in the spell and won't be able to act this turn. So now the other party members can focus on the enemies that are going to be acting and then focus on killing them so that the party takes less damage. And once the creatures that were controlled are the only ones left on the battlefield, you mop them up with whatever's remaining. By killing the creatures that were not controlled first, you're reducing the amount of damage that the party is going to take within the combat. If the controller happened to go after the warrior, say, then the warrior may have wasted their attack on the boss, which was going to be put out of the combat by the control spell anyways. And so when the boss gets taken out of the fight after the warrior attacked them, then it's the equivalent of a wasted attack and a wasted action by the warrior. He could have hit a different creature that would have had a bigger impact and been more relevant within the combat, a creature that actually is still acting and can potentially damage some of the party members, taking away some health resources. Another reason for this is that some control spells affect an area, including allies that are within the area. Allowing the controller to go first usually means that they can cast their area of effect and control the creatures without worrying about the barbarian being in the middle of the fight. The debuffers of the party should go next. Debuffers make enemies suffer penalties to hit and also give them penalties to armor class sometimes. If the debuffer goes before the controller, they may debuff a creature that would have been taken out of the combat by the controller anyway, so it's a wasted spell or ability. By going after the controller, the debuffer has now more information as to which creatures are going to be relevant within the combat, and therefore they can focus their debuffing on those creatures that are still active and were not affected by a control spell, and therefore reduce the effectiveness of the creatures that weren't affected. If they're using debuffs that make creatures easier to hit, they also give the warriors a bigger chance to hit when they get to go, and therefore effectively they're helping increase the damage output of the group by making more attacks land. If the warrior went before the debuffer, let's say reduce the armor class of a creature, then the warrior may hit that creature once, but they may miss on their second attack. If the creature was debuffed first and their armor class was reduced, then the warrior had a higher chance to hit. Maybe they would land both of those attacks, effectively dealing double the amount of damage they would have done had they gone before the debuffer got to send their debuff out. Buffers should go next. Buffers help the party increase their chances to hit. They also decrease the enemy's abilities to damage or hurt the party. Once the crowds have been dealt with by the controller and the debuffer, the buffer can then use their boost for the damage dealers to be more efficient and land their blows. If the buffer goes after the warrior might miss an attack that may instead hit if the buffer had gone before them and boosted their ability to hit. The buffer also can boost the defenses of the warrior so that when they wade into the combat, they're less likely to get hit and use up resources, which is their health bar. And last but not least, the heavy and consistent damage dealers would go next. once enemy troops have been controlled and debuffed, the damage dealers have been buffed, then the damage dealers can really mop up what's left on the battlefield. And what's left on the battlefield is going to be much easier to deal with because they've been debuffed and then the warrior has been buffed. Therefore, enemy, warrior, much greater chance to end everything. Now, there are other roles within a party, but these are the most important, and generally most PCs fall into one of these classes. Of course, most games use dice for determining initiative order, and that's going to make initiative a more random element. But there are things that you can do when you build your characters that can help have a more consistent result in the turn order for the player characters. So you'll want to take ability boost, skills, items, and feats that boost initiative as much as possible when you're the party's controller. You should have the highest initiative bonus in the party if you're the controller for the party. The debuffer should go next, followed by the buffer, and finally the damage dealers. I'm not saying don't go for any initiative bonus at all if you're a damage dealer. Not at all. You don't want to go after the creatures go either. But generally, you want to be conscious of the initiative bonuses of your rest of your party and generally let them have the higher bonuses so that you can have a more tactical approach to a combat. During combat, you can also do certain things that would ensure a tactical initiative order for the first round of combat. Some systems let you delay or hold your action within a round. If you're the debuffer and you beat out the controller in initiative order, maybe you can hold your debuff until after the controller goes and then release your debuff on whatever creatures succeeded their saving throws or were not affected by the debuff by the controller. A buffer usually can go anytime within the initiative order as long as they go before the damage dealers. So if they go first, usually that's fine. Generally, a buffer, it's not as important as long as they go before the damage dealer. Warriors may try a defensive formation or a defensive action to avoid getting hit on that first round, or if they're able to hold their action, maybe they can do that as well. After the first round, when all the controls, debuffs, and buffs are laid out, then the turn order is not as important. So even if the controller didn't win initiative, as long as everyone was able to kind of hold their actions or wait for them to go, then on round 2, that controller goes third. It doesn't matter because they've already laid out their big control spell. Now, I know some of you are thinking the debuffer sometimes should go first because they can ensure that the controller spell lands more efficiently by debuffing some creatures and then the controller getting to go. That could be a solid plan, but I think overall those are less frequent circumstances. Generally, the controller is going to be fairly efficient at controlling the group, and then it's the debuffer's job to affect the ones that weren't affected by control. In my opinion, that's a far more efficient strategy than double dipping, debuffing creatures, and then using control spells for those same creatures, because you're basically using two characters' action economy on one group of creatures that are going to be taken out of the combat, and then the ones that are left are not going to be debuffed. So I think it's a better strategy to control. Those that were not controlled then get debuffed. So even those who succeeded their save against being controlled are still going to be affected by a debuff. That I think tactically is a more sound option. But I'm not saying it's wrong to do it the other way. By all means, if that's what works for you, do it. And those are my thoughts on tactical initiative for RPGs. As I said before, there are exceptions depending on the nature of the combat, the goal of the encounter. Let's say if there is an NPC that's captured and the goal of the encounter is not just to kill creatures, but to rescue this person first, then obviously the tactical initiative order is going to vary. You're going to want the people that are quick, that like the rogues or whatnot, to go first to try and get that person out. But regardless, that's an exception, right? Also, environmental factors might affect whether you want these people to go in certain orders. So the rules that I'm discussing in this video are general guidelines for a standard combat. And my main goal here is to get people thinking more about tactical approaches to a combat in a role-playing game and enforce the tactics that are important, even if you don't care about optimization. Tactics and optimization are two different things, and even people who aren't into optimization, I think, would enjoy tactics within a game, and having improved tactics will make an encounter a lot more fun. If your party feels more synergized and everyone seems to have their role in place, I think it's a more fun combat encounter than if everyone's just kind of doing their own thing. So this is the first video in a new series that I'm going to be doing on RPG tactics, and that's going to be a general approach to general RPGs. Some RPGs work a little bit different than others, so take these rules and apply them to your RPG as they would fit. So what do you think? Do you agree with my assessment here, or do you disagree? Do you have more to add to the conversation for your particular system? Let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to hear about it. And that does it for today's video on tactical initiative. If you have any additional questions or comments, leave them in the comments down below. As always, I'm your Innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then.